paraphrasing it. And we're going to have the verses up on the screen for you. But the Bible says that Job tells us about a man who was blameless and upright. He turned from evil and he feared God. He had 10 children and a treasure trove of possessions. Let's go ahead and put the other verses up there. Skip to verse 3. And by treasure trove, it says he had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels. The other numbers are up there, and it says he was the greatest of all the people of the east. Okay, go on to verse 8. There we go. So then there was a day when Satan is in the presence of God. And Satan challenges the authenticity of Job's love for God, saying that anyone would love God if God had given them what he gave Job. So Satan says that if God just took away the prosperity he had given Job, he'd be revealed as a fake. So God allows this challenge, commanding only that Job himself not be touched. Go ahead and get the other verses up there through 12. And in 12 we see that God commands Satan just to spare Job and not touch him. So to Cliff Notes it, 3 messengers come to Job, each with the news of a calamity. His livestock has been killed, his servants have been killed, and then the 4th comes to tell him that a house has collapsed on all 10 of his children. And we see a response in verse 20. Go ahead and put that up there. 20.
Yeah, I want to pass it.
Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. Does that sound like the response of somebody who just lost everything? Probably not most of us. Go ahead to the next verse. And he said, "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In the last verse, 22. In all of this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. That bit's important. So we see that through all this, he is amazingly at peace as far as God's sovereignty. Go ahead and go to chapter 2, verse 3. So then Satan comes back before the presence of God, and God gloats a bit. And he says the same spiel to Satan. He says, "Have you considered my servant Job, who is blameless? There is none like him in the land." And then he continues, "He still holds fast to his integrity, although you have incited me against him to destroy him without reason." So then Satan retorts. He gives sort of a so what response. He's saying that, okay, you took away everything he has, but you didn't do anything to his health. And if you target that, then he will curse you to your face. And then Job will be revealed as a fake. Let's go on to verse 7. And here we see that Satan afflicted Job with a sickness beyond words. Throughout the book of Job, he gives descriptors that paint a picture. Let's go through some of those. Next verse. "And he took a piece of broken pottery with which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes." So that means that he was itching. That means that he was maybe trying to get stuff out of the boils that were all over him. Go on to the next verse. This is Job speaking. He says, "The night racks my bones, and the pain that gnaws me takes no rest." Next verse. "My skin turns black and falls from me. My bones stick to my skin and to my flesh, and I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. My inward parts are in turmoil and never still. Days of affliction come to meet me. I go about darkened, but not by the sun." Again, saying that his skin is turned black. "I stand up in the assembly and cry for help. My flesh is clothed with worms and dirt." So that means that these boils have opened and they become infected, and there are worms. And it's disgusting. It's a very terrible disease. So stay here for just a minute. Now notice that in Satan's first allowance, God gave him everything except Job himself. But Satan didn't take everything of Job's. He left his wife. And during the first set of trials, there is no evidence that his wife let go of any of her integrity. And then the sickness that we just read about comes. And there's even evidence that she stood with him for a while during that. So his wife isn't killed, and she isn't struck with the same sickness that Job had. So Job has lost all of his children. Then he gets this affliction that is so excruciating that it makes me cringe just to read about it. And you wonder at this point what else could possibly happen. Then after a while, possibly months of enduring her husband having this sickness, it says months elsewhere in the book of Job, his wife finally breaks. One more nail could be driven into Job. Go on to verse 9. There we go. "And then the other shoe drops, and Job is forced to watch the crumbling of his wife's integrity, the shattering of her faith. The one human that had stood with him, that seemed to be unshakable as Job, and then she falls." So there were 3 phases to Job's torture. Mental with his children, physical with the sickness, and then emotional with this wife's falling out. Grief from loss, grief from pain, and then grief from a parting of ways. So then we find Job in this ash pile, and with 3 of his friends, with weird names, all of them, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Being aware of all that has happened, they come to be with him in this suffering. Go on to 2:13. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was very great. So they stay with him for a full 7 days, which was the customary amount of time to mourn death. The death of his children, the death of his wife's faith and integrity, and though he was still alive, it was almost as though he was dead. So after these 7 days, Job starts asking questions. To 3:11. Why did I not die at birth, come out from the womb, and expire? Stay here for just a minute. So we see that he's asking this to no one in particular. He's not necessarily asking his friends. He's just asking it to the air. But it sounds like it could be directed at God. He's holding it back, like asking someone a question without naming them, and keeping your head down so you're not looking right at them. But since Job has broken this silence, the first of his friends is brave enough to speak up in chapter 4, verse 3. And this is the first. This is Eliphaz. He says, "Behold, you have instructed many, and you have strengthened the weak hands." Meaning, Job, you have helped other people in their suffering in the past. Your words have upheld him who was stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. Again, commendations on how he's done others in terms of comforting. Next verse. "But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed." In other words, Job, why are you not practicing what you're preaching? Because that's what it looks like. Go on to the next verse. Because he's speaking to Job out of actual sincerity. The way he sees things is not your fear of God, your confidence, and the integrity of your ways, your hope. Verse 7. "Remember, who that was innocent ever perished? Or where were the upright cut off?" Hold on a second here. That means he's basically saying, Job, there's a principle of Christianity that everyone knows. The righteous prosper and the wicked suffer. And you're suffering, so clearly you've done something wrong and you need to be right with God. Next verse. And he's even speaking from experience here because he says, "As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same." Go on to the next verse. Actually, stop here for just a minute. "And then his second friend speaks, and it's less cautious than the first friend was." First of all, he reiterates Eliphaz's sentiment about the righteous do well and the wicked suffer. But then he's bold enough to say, well, Job, if your children perished, then surely God had something against them. So they definitely deserve that. And then finally his last friend talks, and he's even less polite than the other two. And he goes so far as to say, surely God is holding back, for you actually deserve more than you're receiving. And then in verse 12:3 right here, we see Job's all-encompassing response to all these accusations thrown at him, where he says, "But I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Who does not know such things as these?" So what he's saying in that verse is, like, duh. What you're saying is common knowledge, common sense. I haven't forgotten it just because I'm going through suffering. Your answers don't equate to what the actual problem is, and you're not making any sense. So then a second round of talking takes place, where they all take a turn, all three of them, with each friend sounding like a broken record yet again. Their words are becoming much less polite as they drag on further. And then what's interesting is there's a third round. But as these rounds of talking, first, second, and third, go on, the amount that they have to say seems to decrease. Like Eliphaz, for instance, his first comments toward Job are 48 verses long. His second set is 35, and his third set is 30. Bildad keeps it at 22:21, and then when it comes to his second time to speak, he realizes how redundant he's sounding as well. The other two, he only has 6 verses to say. And then when you get to the third friend, and it's his third time to talk, he doesn't have anything to say at all. So then we see, so 12:3 is his response to all of it. But as he starts to combat this flawed theology of his friends, we now see a problem as he begins to say things about God that just aren't true. So let's move on to chapter 10, verse 3. And this is the interrogation part. So 10 verse 3 says, "Does it seem good to you to oppress, to despise the work of your hands, and favor the designs of the wicked?" And that is actually aimed at God. Go on to 13. Okay, well, 4. Have you eyes of flesh, and do you see as man sees? That's also directed at God. Next verse. 13:23 says, "How many are my iniquities and my sins? Make me known my transgression and my sin." That's a direct challenge to God, saying, if I've really done something, tell me now, because you can search me and you will see nothing. Next verse. "Why do you hide your face and count me as your enemy?" Next verse. "You put my feet in the stocks and watch all my paths. You set a limit to the soles of my feet." So those are all very direct challenges to him. In his eyes, God views him as an enemy. He demands to know what he's done to deserve this. And then a young man named Elihu bursts on the scene and basically tells off both parties. Job's friends and Job, that they're wrong. Job's friends for obvious reasons. We don't even need to know that they're wrong. But Elihu is angry that Job was claiming innocence at the expense of God's grace. So you go to 33:8. "Surely you have spoken in my ears, and I have heard the sound of your words." That's Elihu saying, I've heard all of what you said, Job. I know your argument, I know where you're coming from, but you're still wrong. Next verse. "You say, I am pure without transgression. I am clean, and there is no iniquity in me." I haven't done anything. Next verse. "Behold, he finds occasions against me." God, "he counts me as his enemy." Next verse. "He puts my feet in the stocks and watches all my paths." Next verse. "Behold, in this you are not right." He's saying, in none of these things you have said are you correct. So, is that the last one? "Man is also rebuked with pain on his bed and with continual strife in his bones." So this is what Elihu is saying here, is he's explaining what Job's suffering is. Job wants to know why, and Elihu's telling him why. Next verse. "That he may turn away from his deed and conceal pride from a man." Next verse. "He keeps back his soul from the pit, his life from perishing by the sword." So back up 2 verses from where that was. So he's saying, man is rebuked from pain on his bed. Skip forward 2 verses. "So that he keeps back his soul from the pit, and his life from perishing by the sword." So Elihu is trying to tell Job, you should be thankful that you've been afflicted with all of this, because this is saving you. This is making you better. All right, go on. And 38:1 says, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind." So when Elihu's done talking, the storm had been building up, and Job finally answers it. Next verse. "Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me." So hold on right there for a minute. Earlier, Job said, "Make known my transgressions." And this is God kind of reporting back to him, saying, this time I'm going to question you, and you make it known to me. I don't owe you answers. Next verse. "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding." Next verse. "Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst from the womb?" Next verse. So just keep going when I finish these. "Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place? Have you comprehended the expanse of the earth? Tell me if you know all this. Go ahead, speak up. Where is the way to the dwelling of light, and where is the place of darkness? Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain and a way for the thunderbolt? From whose womb did the ice come forth, and who has given birth to the frost of heaven? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you establish their rule on the earth? Can you take my job? Can you hunt the prey for the lion, or satisfy the appetite of the young lions? Who provides for the raven its prey, when its young ones cry to God for help, and wander about for lack of food? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? Is the wild ox willing to serve you? Will he spend the night at your manger? Is it by your understanding that the hawk soars and spreads his wings toward the south? Or is it at your command that the eagle mounts up and makes his nest on high? And hold on here for just a minute. So then Job responds in Job 40, verse 4. After this torrent of questions, he finally begins to understand why God is interrogating him. He says, "Behold, I am of small account. I am nothing. What shall I answer you? I have no responses to these questions. I lay my hand on my mouth." So then God gives him a second torrential just attack of questions. There's over 60 total. The ones we read a minute ago were half of the first one. Over 60 questions about all these things that Job could not possibly know. And what God is getting at is, he's saying, you're complaining about this sickness that you have and all these things that happen to you and you don't know why. But how can you start to know when all of these things are in place in the universe? I control them, I make them move, I operate them, and you don't understand any of this, so how could you understand why things are happening? And then we see Job's second response here in 42:2. He responds out of utter humility. "I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted." Next verse. "I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you." And hold here for a minute. So I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear. What he's saying is, God, I've heard of you before. I thought I knew you. I thought that I knew how powerful you were. But I guess I wasn't completely right in all the ideas I had made about you. And notice he says, "But now my eye sees you." Notice he didn't say that after any of his friends gave what they thought was credible advice. He didn't say, "My eye sees this God now." So after this legalistic doctrine that his friends were throwing at him, he didn't respond. And when Elihu, the guy that comes to rebuke both of them, when he gives his correct doctrine, still, Job does not say anything like this. He said, "I heard of you by the hearing of the ear." But now that God has spoken to him through this interrogation, now that he's revealed how powerful he actually is through all these questions, he says, "Now my eye sees you." So remember that earlier, at the very beginning of this book, we had this window to the heavenly conversations between Satan and God, where Satan was challenging the authenticity of God's faith, or Job's faith to God, and God was saying, "No, this guy is rock solid. Do whatever you want, and he's not going to desert me." Now notice that if we did not have those windows into those conversations, if it just simply cut to the messengers come to Job and tell him about these things that happened, and his children die in this freak accident that knocks the house over on them, we would not know what's going on. And that is because we can't find the answers to any of the whys here on earth. We have to have that heavenly perspective that we were allowed a little bit of in the beginning of the book, because we know what's going on, but if we didn't have that, then we would not. So, in closing, we now see that the ultimate goal behind Job's suffering was his refinement, was for his sanctification. God wanted to refine him, advance his holiness, and the primary way for God to do this, to advance our walk with him, is through hardships, great and small. Evidence of this relief is found in Psalm 119:71. The next verse on the slide. Psalm. It says, "It is good for me that I was afflicted, that I might learn your statutes." So the psalmist is saying, thank you, I know things about you now that I would not have if I were not afflicted. And then skip to the James one, this is the last one we'll do. "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds." Let me say one last thing. So earlier we were singing Oceans. And it was the one song that you were all singing that I could hear from the back. So I know you were singing these words, but there's a part in there where it says, "Take me deeper than my faith. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander." And if you think about that, that's saying ever wander. So that's saying in the state that you're in now, that song, if you sing it, it's asking God, take me to another level. It's saying, and the way you get to another level is through hardships, like what Job went through. Because God has to use things like that to show you what's buried down that he could not reveal except through all of this. And so some of you tonight, you may be going through hardships. Not nearly as tragic as Job, I would definitely hope. But you may be asking why. And that's a good question. But we don't get answers. God does not owe us answers. All God expects us to do is, again, like that song Ocean said, just find your soul's embrace in Him. That is not what Job's wife did. His wife was trying to keep her eyes above the waves, but she was not at rest at all. And that's why when it eventually came down to it, she said, you know what, I'm out. I'm done. But Job's soul was at rest in God's embrace. And that's how he was able to go through all of this with his faith in God changed for the better, but intact. And so these altars are open tonight. If you're going through something, if you need answers, if you just want to find God, the Word says that if anyone seeks Him, He will allow Himself to be found. I don't know what more encouraging verse there is in the Bible than, if you come looking for me, I'll allow myself to be found by you. So just come find Him.
Oh, the Father saw in the days of old. Would you do it again? Would you do it again? All the miracles and all the stories told. Would you do it again? Would you do it again?